Possibly on live. Let me just check my other windows. It still says waiting for RB, but is it accurate? Possibly on live. Let me just check my other windows. It still says waiting for RB, but is it accurate? Possibly on live. Let me just check my... Okay. So I am here. I am the only one waiting, I believe. And I'm just going to confirm this is the chat window, right? All right. It really looks like I have the right thing, but so far nobody here. And I guess I'll be trying to edit this out when I eventually post it. Hope that's possible, otherwise it'll just have an awkward minute or two before it starts. So, let's switch tabs, make sure I'm not doing anything awful. Go to my Patreon. Because I really want to make sure that I got it right this time. Okay. All right, so I did definitely make a mistake because that's the kind of person I am. And now let's check it and see if it'll work from my Patreon. I think it should now. I just asked if it's good now on Patreon, but I should really be looking at the actual event. Two watching. Okay, so whatever's going on, either I've accidentally opened this in two windows and it's both me. Maybe that's possible. Or somebody's watching. So, hi. Yeah. So originally I wanted to do this on the topic of some writing that I had projected to be finished at this point in time. Oh, hello. Hi, Furious Felt. Thank you for being here. Can you hear me? Okay. All right, all good. All right. So I'm going to start. So as I was saying, I had initially wanted to do this on the topic of some writing that I had projected to be done at this point in time, but because I was sick for the past month, that writing just never really happened. So instead, I want to kind of do a story time, and then from that extrapolate what I learned about this contextually from about Japanese society in my area in general, and maybe talk about how that might be integrated into some of the writing that I will do at a later point in time, because I think it's kind of interesting. So, the title of this is I ate fraudulent pancakes, got skeeved on by yakuza, and then my table started on fire. And that was my night last night. It was super fun. So to start off, for kind of context, I was out at a friend's house pretty late last night and got back to my neighborhood around 10 p.m. and started thinking about dinner. I don't usually go to restaurants, and especially not bars around my area. I don't even go grocery shopping in my area because as a teacher, it's just kind of weird to be running into your students all the time when you're just out and about living your life. But I made an exception last night, and I found an okonomiyaki place that was about 4 minutes walk from my apartment. And I thought that sounded great. I love okonomiyaki. But if you ask a Japanese person what okonomiyaki is, you might get like the translation that the name means, fried as you like. Or you might get like the kind of confusing explanation that it's a Japanese pancake. And that's just not true at all. I'm not sure why we have that, because there's just completely different feelings. Like pancakes are sweet and okonomiyaki is savory. So it's the batter is made of like cabbage and flour and an egg, and then you put whatever you want in it, vegetables, sometimes tofu, cheese, like a lot of meats and seafoods. But it's definitely not pancakes. So we went, my boyfriend and I went to this tiny little okonomiyaki bar in my neighborhood, and when we walked in, it was immediately kind of an interesting experience. So it was a very, very small place, and it kind of looked like stepping into somebody's house. My boyfriend said, "Oh, I have such a good feeling from this place," at pretty much the exact same time that I thought, I have such a bad feeling from this place. So I think the reason for those differing reactions was that it really did seem like walking into a Japanese person's house, which, for a Japanese person, feels kind of homey. And for me, obviously, as a Westerner living in Japan, I'm kind of out of place in most places, but you feel a little bit more strongly in other places, some places than others. So I immediately felt really out of place. But, I convinced myself that, it's okay. It's not so bad. I didn't like the smoke because my sister is, like, asthmatic, so I always feel like, oh, we've got to go now or she's going to die. But she wasn't with me. So we sat down, and we had a couple of beers, and the best okonomiyaki I have had in my life. And so this whole time that we've been kind of relaxing and eating dinner, there's been cheerful, loud conversation up at the bar. It's a really small place. I hadn't really been paying attention, but in retrospect, a lot of the cheerful conversation had been coming disproportionately from 2 gentlemen sitting at the bar. There were 3 gentlemen sitting at the bar, 2 ladies, and then 1 lady behind the counter. And I would say everybody there was between maybe 50 and 70 years old, so it really didn't feel like my scene. Anyways, these 2 gentlemen who had been very exuberant, clearly having a great time, stood up, got ready to leave. One of them walked all the way to the door, and the other one, apparently just noticed that I had come in and I was sitting at the back table because, they hadn't really been paying attention. And he called his buddy back from the door, and got way close to me, like, frankly, too close to me, And they were having some kind of conversation that was obviously, like, about me and not to me. And at first, I was just like, okay, this is rude, but it's kind of within parameters of, just drunk older dudes. They're surprised to see a foreign person in town. Like, it's not necessarily a problem. You don't have to be a very interesting person to realize that, like, oh, you stand out a little bit as a Westerner walking around in very rural Japan. So, yeah, people people sometimes come over and talk to you. And like, I didn't, really want to be approached by, strange drunk men on my free time. But I mean, it's something that you just got to deal with sometimes. And also, there's a pretty good possibility that they knew who I was. So I thought, oh, maybe these are parents of some of my students or something like that. That's what they're saying. Like, oh, is this that person? The thing is that like I pretty quickly just like the bad vibes were kind of intensifying because I was realizing that I definitely got the sense that they were talking to each other about me, and whatever it was, like, it was funny. There were jokes. Like, they weren't with me at all. So at this point, they had not tried to speak to me anyway. They weren't engaging with me. It was at my expense. And the thing is that, like, the people sitting at the bar were no longer talking, but they weren't watching either. They were just sitting there. And I started to feel like something was really kind of wiggy here. Because if it had just been kind of a normal case of like, oh, well, there's some interesting people in the bar, you'd think like people would be turning around or at least, like glancing back, mildly interested, but they were just deliberately not engaging with this at all. And also, I started to kind of get the feeling that the conversation they were having about me was kind of like gross and sexual in nature. But it was really weird because this was kind of dissonant with the read I was getting from the way my boyfriend was reacting. So I looked across the table to him, like, what's going on? Can you explain? And he just had, he was just, sitting there pleasant, not saying anything. And so that was just really kind of bizarre to me because obviously, like, I'm not going to be in a relationship with a person who is not responsive, to, when I'm like obviously confused or asking him for help or explanation. So I knew something was really kind of weird. And then these guys actually started to talk to me, and it just was throwing up all sorts of like bad signals because when a Japanese person meets a new person, they're going to introduce themselves in some format. If they're drunk, having a good time, or, not particularly polite, they might not do it like super correctly, but they'll almost always at least try to establish like, oh, are you a teacher? Why are you here? Are you traveling? Oh, I live here. But there was just none of that, which is just so weird for small town Japanese norms. So when they asked me like, where are you from? I'm like, oh, okay, that's okay. This is the first normal thing that's happened. I'm like, oh, America kara kimashita. And like one of the guy who's like standing up close to me, takes a couple steps in, he's like, oh, America jin, Nipponjin. And I'm like, okay, these are just some drunk dudes because that is such a weirdly obvious thing to say. Like I wasn't comfortable, but I played it off like it was a joke. I was like, Honton ni Nihon, Nihon de Nihonjin desu ka? Uso. Like no way, a Japanese person in Japan can't be. And he liked that. And they asked me a couple of more questions, which I couldn't understand at all, which is pretty weird, because I'm, far from being an expert in Japanese, but you tend to have the same kinds of conversations with strangers, and the fact that there was just nothing I could pick out was bizarre. So I just, wakaran, gomen ne, wakaran, and, they're like, okay, fine. And one of them, like, gets in way too close, and he puts his hands on me, and he's like, and he tells me, we are mafia, Japanese mafia. Do you know? And I'm like, what the shit? I don't like being touched by strangers. I don't like being touched by drunk men. I definitely just don't like being touched by anybody, in general. Just, that's weird. But I played it off. I was like, oh, oh, really? Oh, so desu ka, so desu ka. And I don't know what reaction he was going for, but it wasn't that. So this is the only time that they turned and looked at my boyfriend, and they went, they asked, like, is that the English word? He goes, yes. And that's it. That's all he said. Like, that was all they wanted from him. He was not invited to participate in this in any format whatsoever. Which is weird, because even, like, when like, somebody is being skeevy and my boyfriend is there, yeah, oh, fucking shit, indeed. Like, usually they're kind of gross people, but, like, they kind of empathize with my boyfriend. They're like, oh, you dating a foreigner? Oh, I'm so jealous. Like, because sometimes people are really weird like that. And then, like, yeah, there's usually, like, the big boobs comment because people are really gross sometimes. But, yeah, but he was just not included in this in any way. And yeah, I don't really know what they said after that. I just played really stupid and really polite. I did not move away from this physical contact I did not want. And they left. And only after they're leaving do I go, like, was he telling the truth? Like, he had to be kidding, right? Like, who just goes up and tells somebody that they're part of the yakuza? Like, and I'm like, it was the truth. And actually, now that I think about it, like, I have heard that there's a yakuza headquarters on my island, about 40 minutes away from my neighborhood. But I didn't really think I would ever meet any of those kind of people, because generally, like, you just leave them alone and they leave you alone. So I was, like, starting to kind of freak out, and like the panic is rising, but my boyfriend is still on just, like, polite lockdown, just totally out of character. He does not ignore my emotional signals. If I'm asking him for clarification, he never ignores me, like, because who would, and who would date somebody who was like that? And so, like, I go in, like, what just happened? And he's like, let's talk later. And I'm just like, like, so the other old people in this bar, like, are we surrounded by gangsters? Is that what I can understand from this? And so yeah, so we ate our okonomiyaki, quietly, and I just want to say it might have been, fear sharpening my taste buds, but it was by far the most delicious okonomiyaki I have ever had. And I have had home cooked okonomiyaki, like, from wonderful, like, grandmotherly types. So, I know I've had good okonomiyaki. It was amazing, and yeah, I was scared out of my wits, because I'm like, are those guys gonna come back? Like these people who are still here, like, are these okay, normal people? Is it worse to stay here and pretend nothing's wrong, or to get the fuck out of town? But a little while after that, when we order, refills, it did become clear that actually, like, a separate group. So those two gentlemen were not wanted on the premises. Go away, I don't want to talk to you right now, my love. Anyways, but yeah, they were not invited, they were not wanted. It's just that you can't tell them to leave. You can't tell these people you don't want them in your bar. So everybody else had just been sort of enduring it, waiting for them to leave. And the proprietress sort of apologized to us, and she said, like, oh, like, those kind of guys, they're a dying breed. Like, the yakuza, like, nobody wants, just kind of, like, dumb toughs anymore. They don't want, that's not what they're recruiting for, like, they're don't worry about them, in 10 years that'll all be gone, because they're recruiting out of the top universities now, which was scary in a different way. But I guess if you live in a little fishing village, that has, some comfort to it. Yeah, and that was about the time that the table started on fire, which was a completely separate issue. But if you've ever been to an okonomiyaki place, like, they cook the pancake oh god, the fraudulent pancake right on the table. Like there's a grill in the middle, and like it's a hot plate, and then to the side there's always like a little gap. Yeah, exactly. What? So apparently some previous patron, like some drunk skunk, had dropped their lighter full of fluid into this thing and had not seen fit to tell anybody. And so like suddenly, like about 4 inches from my right hand, there is like a 6-foot flame, you know, out of my table, and I'm just like, that's just the kind of night I'm having. So so yeah, we pulled back the like our poor melted plastics, you know, and like the people at the bar had not noticed this at all because, you know, we were all drinking up a storm. It was like the strongest beer I've had in my life. You know, my boyfriend turns off the table and, you know, he's like, you know, sumimasen, you know, chotto abenai desu ne, you know, and he gets the lady to come over and take the lighter out. And then I had like a whole nother beer, and I just, you know, kind of considered my life choices. And yeah, so I was running on so much adrenaline. I didn't feel as terrified as I did, like, you know, but we paid, we left, you know, we had some like strangely kind of domestic pleasant times in this restaurant because it really was freaking delicious. And like you know, it's just, you know, some nice, stop calling, baby. Honestly, like, come on. Yeah, like you know, the lady working there was really nice. It was just, you know, really kind of local place, like local hangout. And they also had a live-in dog, which is how you know a place is friendly, aside from the yakuza. They had a little dog, a black, I think, schnauzer, named Nezumi-chan, which is Rat. This is Miss Rat. You know, so, you know, we left, you know, we walked home, we left Miss Rat, you know, and all her friends. And actually my panic is rising, you know, and I'm like, baby, can you please explain to me now? And he's like, I'm sorry, maybe I should have said before, but the first time I came here, I actually did think that you lived in a really bad neighborhood, but I didn't say anything. Maybe I should have. I'm like, yes, sweetheart, you should have said something. That's the kind of thing that I personally like to know. I like to know that I am living in a bad neighborhood. And I especially like to know interesting facts. Here's an interesting fact for you. The second largest yakuza headquarters in Japan is the one 40 minutes from my house. And the other one is about an hour from my house. So it's kind of weird that I've lived here 2.5 years and no one has thought that might be relevant information. Yeah. Yeah, so I had a, like, you know, kind of the longer I spent at home, like the worse I felt, you know, really kind of freaked out by this information. But, you know, after that, I learned some factual stuff. So, for example, like I learned that it used to be that most of this yakuza activity was centered out of Kobe, which is, you know, currently where the largest headquarters is now. But there was some infighting, and an important faction moved to my area. I had heard from other foreigners that yakuza were active in the area, but that they didn't really, you know, bother foreigners for certain, and probably didn't really bother normal people unless you kind of caught their eye. And my boyfriend confirmed that. You know, he apologized and he said, like, I'm sorry, you know, I didn't really stand up for you. Like, I wanted to say something, but I kind of thought that if I said, you know, hey, you can't talk about the lady that way, they probably would have killed me. I'm like, is that hyperbole, sweetie? And he wasn't sure how probable that was. He told me, like, oh, don't worry, they probably don't mess with you, because, you know, Japanese on Japanese crime is a lot different from, you know, like bringing kind of international government into it. I'm like, that's not super reassuring. And he said, well, they probably wouldn't kill me anyways, because you really most of like the violence is yakuza, because they can't afford to have police kind of interfering, because they're so interconnected that, if they've got, even, some like relatively lower level guys, just kind of like muscle of the type that we encountered, like it kind of leads the police to their associates, and the police really do kind of crack down hard on yakuza in the modern day and age. But he said probably the reason that no one called the police on them is because in my area, the yakuza are more influential than the police because they're older. And I thought he meant because like the yakuza men were older than the police. I'm like, well, that's not true. A lot of the police are kind of old too, like 40, 50s. And also that's a really weird basis for a power system. But he actually meant that the yakuza organization had been like powerful and established and operating in the area for longer. And also because I live in a really kind of like small community. Yeah. So that's some interesting facts that I learned. Not my very best date night, if I'm gonna be honest. Maybe even a personal worst date. Haven't we all been on some bad dates? Yeah. But I did learn some interesting things. So for example, kind of about the way that Japanese people view that kind of organized crime, like the function and place that yakuza have in Japanese society. So I knew that they were ostracized. Like, have any of you ever been to an onsen in Japan? I'm watching the comments. So far, nothing. But if you have, you will know that something a lot of foreigners dislike is that the onsen forbid you to come into the public baths if you have tattoos. That is to keep out foreigners. Yes. Yeah. Sorry, it's to keep out yakuza. Did I say to keep out foreigners? I got distracted. So a lot of Japan is kind of that way. They're not welcome in everyday society, and sometimes they can kind of bully their way into it. But they can be arrested just for being out in public space. Like the reason why, the one guy, asked Ken, like, is that the English word? And never said it in Japanese, is that he could have been arrested just for saying that word, just for saying yakuza. And so I'm told that I had a very unique experience, because usually you don't interact with yakuza at all, because they live kind of in their own parallel worlds. And if they go out to a restaurant or something, like they're going to eat really quickly and get out of there before they can get in any kind of trouble. So basically, I didn't actually feel very flattered by that. I'm like, so it's just kind of a madly interesting thing in their space. Like, yeah, and that's what happened. And I was trying to get explanation about, like what happened, like what were they saying, because I told my boyfriend like I got the feeling that they were being like kind of like gross and sexual, and he's like, yeah, but I don't really know what they were saying. It was so much like slang, he couldn't understand it, which is interesting because my neighborhood is really not that far from where my boyfriend is from. He has an aunt a great aunt from the area, and his family currently lives, like an hour away from my neighborhood. So the fact that whatever they were saying was just completely incomprehensible to him is kind of interesting. Yeah. So that was my fun experience. And my boyfriend just keeps calling me. He's not take a hint. Probably wants to know if he's gotten the right groceries. But yeah. So that was my experience. But I was actually kind of thinking about what I learned from this, about Japanese perception of that kind of organized crime and the place that it has in Japanese society. I thought it was really kind of fascinating, the way that, people just seem resigned to it. Like, it's there. We just don't interact with it normally. We don't have to deal with it. And, if they come into your space, you just kind of grin and bear it until they go. Just don't provoke them. So I was thinking about maybe kind of trying to work that into one of the stories that I have going or something else. I mean, it's just kind of an element about Japan that obviously like they don't really write about in the the travel guides or official sites and things like that. It's the kind of casual cultural knowledge that Japanese people seem to have, but obviously like that kind of thing is either absent or kind of sensationalized for foreign consumption. So I'm kind of interested to maybe kind of try to more accurately portray some of that organized crime and just how it fits into Japanese society. And I don't know. Does anybody else feel like, I don't know, is it reassuring or not what the host lady said that, oh, don't worry, like they're a dying breed. They're recruiting from the top universities. They don't want just laborers anymore. I guess, I feel like I feel more immediately safe, but I don't necessarily know that it's better for Japan. So, yeah. So I want to kind of consider some of those things. And I want to really quick start copying all of these comments. I want to save them because I am so glad that this has worked out. Does anybody have any questions about this before I finish up? Or like any direction they'd like to see this go? Which story they'd like to see it in? And because, obviously, Aiko and Canon is always pretty solid. Oh, hi Kitty. But I was thinking maybe of the story, the other kind of self-insert story might be a natural fit, especially since the protagonist is currently spending time in civilian areas where organized crime might be more kind of on the ground, so to speak, than in shinobi countries. Okay, so now I'm gonna sit here in my good posture and see if anybody has a comment on that. With the other SI story. Okay. All right. I'm thinking about integrating that into the storyline that's going on in Iron right now. It's hard for me to remember what exactly you guys have seen because I've kind of installed on it for so long after I lost everything and had to rewrite, and then spent this last month sick. Oh, you can rewrite it, Kitty. I'm sorry. Or sorry, watch. But anyways, I was thinking about maybe having that become kind of a major plot point in what's going on in Iron. Because it's just not very interesting if we enter into a country where we don't explore much in canon and everything is just totally normal and ideal there. That's no fun. You gotta introduce some trouble. So maybe I guess Iron, I don't know. I guess at this point they would be kind of maybe more old school Yakuza situation going on. But we would kind of maybe start to see the transition to kind of the new breed. And one thing that is also like I'm going to include is kind of the element of a lot of cultural exchange. I haven't really done it in my other Naruto stories, but it is canon that the outside world, the Western world, exists. In the Naruto verse, Texas exists, so a lot of it does. And in Japanese history, one kind of interesting thing that happened was people being sent to study in foreign nations, like going there to learn their languages and to learn like some science, like they got, like books and information imported in, but they also like would send people from influential houses, often women. Yes, Texas exists in Naruto. Isn't that so bizarre? But but I'm gonna run with it. So yeah, I'm planning on setting that story at the kind of period in time where that kind of cultural exchange is going on. So it's going to be really, really rare and unusual to see a Westerner in the Naruto verse, but I think they're getting some like some interaction and probably some kind of exports or imports, sorry, going on through at least a couple of the elemental nations. And I think iron is going to be one of them because they seem to be a point of development. A lot of the technological innovation in Naruto comes from that area. So that's kind of my one of the perspectives I'm taking, one of the elements I'm using in that story. Okay. Life from Kishi's artist. Oh, Kishi's artist Sasuke and Sakura riding a horse dressed like cowboys. Actually, that's kind of an older cultural exchange thing. So, Japanese people who are kind of grandparents' age right now, like 70s, 80s, 90s, would have in their young adulthood seen a lot of westerns, and so like that kind of did form their conceptions of the Western world and like how we dress, what we do. And sometimes like when I'm talking to some friendly older Japanese person, that's the kind of frame of reference they have for America in specific. So I guess that element could be going on, but that's not so much what I was thinking about. Okay. Well, yeah, I think it's really fun. Okay. Well, during this vid, I think that my boyfriend has called me 4 times. Maybe he wants me to unlock the door. I kicked him out to do this. So I am going to finish up. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And please feel free to continue to comment on this, with any kind of directions you want this to go, anything you'd be interested to see. Yeah, because, I'm working on that story and, designing it still. And, I kind of want it to go places where I haven't taken my other Naruto work. So, yeah. So that's what I have going on. Thank you for being here today. And now I'm going to say goodbye and then probably like lean in forward and spend 5 minutes trying to end this live stream. So at that point, just consider yourself done. All right. I am copying the last to the chat. Any final words? Control. Okay, thank you. I will have a good week. I hope all of you do as well. Okay. Bye-bye. Okay. And oh, you're welcome.